Good evening and welcome to our community conversations at Grace. I'm Drew McIntyre. I'm the pastor at Grace United Methodist Church. I'm joined this evening by Reverend David Fraccaro from FaithAction International House. Dave, how are you doing this evening?
I'm hanging in, friend. I appreciate this opportunity. Look forward to speaking with you all.
It is good to have you with us. We've had you before physically at Grace to be a part of our Sunday worship and share during the Sunday school hour, and that's always been a treat. Of course, during this time when social distancing is important, we're doing this via Zoom, as many things are now. But that also enables more people to participate, and we can put this conversation that we're recording online, and people can catch up with it later. So it'll get, I think, a lot more exposure than even if we were doing this on a Sunday morning or evening. So thanks so much for being with us. We're going to have just a time of conversation and sort of hear Dave's story and the story of FaithAction and their work. We do want to also hear in particular about how all that's going on with the pandemic has affected our immigrant and refugee neighbors, how we as a church community and we as Greensboro residents can be a partnership, not just with FaithAction, but with our neighbors. And then we'll also have a time of Q&A. We have a number of folks from our church family on this evening, and they might have some questions as well. So we'll get started, and I'll shut up. Dave, if you just maybe say a word first about your own background, maybe where you're from, your training, things like that, and then how you came to do this work in particular.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking, and again, I appreciate the opportunity and everybody at Grace and their partnership. I grew up the son of a minister and the son of a therapist right on the Indiana-Kentucky border on the Ohio River in a little township called Paradise, Indiana, ironically enough. Little to no diversity at all. An idyllic, beautiful upbringing, but little to no diversity in terms of racial, cultural, or religious diversity. And through my father's ministry, it was always very important for him, for me to know that there was much more than small town Indiana. And there were people of many cultures, races, faiths, nationalities. And that there was at times a tremendous amount of inequality in the world, and that it was important to stand up alongside people who were oppressed. And so I very much, despite my small town upbringing, kind of read the Bible and attended church through that lens. Went to school in Miami, Florida, got a theater degree, and ended up going and moving to New York City, Queens, the most at that time diverse neighborhood in the entire world, to try to be a hotshot actor. Thought I'd be living in Manhattan, but realized pretty quickly I wasn't going to be able to afford the rent there unless I was starring on a television show or something. And so lived out in Queens, and moved there in the spring of 2000, and was there and saw the towers fall in 2001. And like everybody was old enough to remember that who's on this call, that was one of the closest time we've come to feeling kind of as a nation like the world may very well be coming to an end. Obviously, what's going on now with the pandemic kind of rivals the collective panic and concern. But that caused me to really take a slowly but surely a different path, and I started attending church again, something I had taken a break on during college, and the Riverside Church on the Upper West Side of Manhattan that the Rockefellers built, beautiful church, but it was a ministry of the church called the Sojourners Ministry with detained immigrants and asylum seekers that ended up really changing my life. And so I'd go once a week with a small group of students from around that area, as well as church members. We'd take a van to the outskirts of Newark and JFK airports, to these abandoned airport warehouses, where inside were 300 men and women from all over the world, most of whom had committed no crime other than not having the right documents when they came to this country. And the paradox is under current immigration law, there was actually no way for them to get legal documents to come to this country. It's nearly impossible, and still is. We just haven't had any significant immigration reform in a long time to really change that. and they were just doing what they needed to do to keep themselves and their family alive. And when they got to the airport or the border, they were put in chains, put in orange and blue jumpsuits, and put in this high security detention facility that was icebox cold, no windows, kind of dank and dirty. We've heard about detention centers, obviously. The nation kind of awoke to the idea of immigrant detention about a year and a half ago, especially with the current administration's policy around separating children at the border, something that actually sadly is still happening, even though it's kind of been out of the public view for a while. But detention has been around for decades, even centuries in this country. And so it just, once 9/11 happened, you saw it really increase significantly. And these were people from all over the world, Tibetan Buddhists fleeing Chinese religious persecution, West African Muslims fleeing near genocide at the time, Catholic Colombian Christians who were kidnapped by a guerrilla group fighting the military. These were the kind of people that I ended up being face to face across a bulletproof glass with, and a little barbed wire hole that we used to speak. And wasn't my culture, wasn't my faith, wasn't my nationality, had no clue what to say. But maybe it was the acting training, just kind of learned to pay attention a little bit more to the silence, to the body language. And we managed to communicate despite not knowing the same language, through our hands, through our eyes. There were a lot of tears on their end, but they could tell that I was expressing empathy, and they were expressing friendship to me. And this was something different than they were getting from the guards. And so going one time, visiting one time, turned into visiting, nearly every week for the next 7-8 years. And some of these individuals inside became very important to me. I was not only able to bring them a sense of comfort, break up some of the isolation, and provide a little bit of oversight, so somebody knew they were inside and was kind of watching their back, but they were also very much kind of teachers to me. They showed me the best of kind of the human spirit to survive in the midst of that kind of hell. They inspired me so much by their courage and their resilience, that auditioning for Mamma Mia just wasn't all that important anymore. So I ended up quitting acting, went to seminary, got an additional degree in human rights, kind of looking at the intersect of faith and migration. Eventually, I should note that I now oftentimes will say that today I'm a Christian pastor. Yeah, but about 45 minutes. Okay, I'll be out in just a second. Sorry about that. And so I'm a, hey buddy, just give me a second. Okay, you're welcome to sit on the bed if you'd like. Okay. That today I'm a Christian pastor because of my Tibetan Buddhist, West African Muslim, Catholic Colombian friends inside the detention. And quite frankly, they were as good, if not better, teachers that I had in a fancy Ivy League school in New York City, even though I'll be paying for that for the next 400 years. I share that story to say that that's really the root of why I'm in the work I'm in now. And while I had some work and did some work overseas and from some larger think tank organizations in New York and Chicago, I really realized I didn't need to try to be somebody's savior overseas. What I really needed to do was be back in a town not too dissimilar from the one I grew up in Indiana, in a city like Greensboro that 25 years ago just started going through some extremely rapid demographic shifts. North Carolina has been in the top 10 states in terms of the increase in immigrants and refugees over the last 25 years. And a lot of that diversity is coming on top of what's been a very complicated, at times horrific history between African American and white population. And now you have this new layer of diversity from all over the world. And I wanted to be in a little bit more of a medium-sized southern city that was, trying to make up its mind. Are we going to fear one another as strangers or embrace one another as neighbors? And I'm a big believer that it's best to initially answer that question, taking off our political hat, putting on our faith hat. Churches, mosques, temples, when people wear their faith hat on this issue, it's clear that their faith has a whole lot to say about how to answer that question. in our Judeo-Christian heritage, for sure. And we're told to welcome the stranger 44 times, I think, in the Bible, and love our neighbor as ourselves, and expand our notion of who our neighbor is. And so it just ends up being as urgent and as crucial a question as ever, and was thrilled to find an organization like Faith Action, and I'll end here, serves immigrants, educates the larger community about immigration issues, so they're not believing everything they hear on the evening news or in political debates. And then basically bringing those two groups together, the immigrants we serve, the larger community we educate, so they come together to eat, to laugh, to sing, to cry, to dance, to kick a soccer ball together, to do what God hoped human beings would do from the beginning of time, to really build positive, caring relationships with one another. And so it's been a heck of a journey for the last about decade that I've been here. So thanks for listening.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. We just talked, a couple weeks ago. We had Pentecost Sunday, and Pentecost. I always try to talk about in preaching about the importance of the vision of the gospel as a worldwide movement, as God's Spirit that brings people together, and they can hear each other and communicate and celebrate together, even though they're from different places and speak different languages. God brings them together. And it's a beautiful, beautiful vision. Could you say more about maybe the story of Faith Action, how Faith Action's work maybe intermingles? I know there's a lot of agencies, organizations, not just in Greensboro, but in North Carolina, that do maybe connected work, but I don't have a great sense of how they all sort of fit together, and how you specifically, your work fits into that.
Yeah, Faith Action was definitely one of the first over 20 years ago, and there was a group of diverse faith leaders and immigrant leaders who recognized the beginnings of these significant demographic shifts happening in Greensboro, North Carolina. So they said, we want to build a place where newcomers can feel welcome, where we can also educate the larger public about these issues, and then bring them both together so that strangers become neighbors. And what they recognized is, for newcomers, it can be an incredibly intimidating experience coming to this country, learning a new social system, learning a new language. Many of them live near or below the poverty line. The majority of the people that Faith Action served may have had limited or no immigration status, and again, no line to get into to get immigration status. So it was really important that we actually made this place a house. That's why we're Faith Action International House, because it's actually a house, so that people feel a lot more comfortable coming into a home. They're oftentimes greeted by caseworkers who come from the immigrant experience themselves, who speak the same language or share the same faith or culture. Treated with tremendous dignity and respect, kind of it's a safe refuge from the storm outside, and kind of meet them where they're at and help them with whatever it is that they've come to the door with. And our goal is to really help lift those burdens so they can kind of continue on the road towards greater self-sufficiency, so they feel more comfortable integrating into the community. And if possible, especially if immigration reform would finally come, and it really hasn't come over the last 25 years since Faith Action began, but hopefully one day there'll be a path for them to actually gain legal status, more or less citizenship. And over that period of time, what made us Faith Action is not that we promoted any particular faith, but rather we recognized the shared values of many faiths around the shared values of welcoming the stranger, loving our neighbor as ourselves, the basic inherent dignity of all human beings as a part of God's creation, as children of God. And we believed in bringing many churches and synagogues and mosques and temples together to put their faith into action around those shared values, to help us serve our clients, to invite us in to educate them on these issues, to stand along and speak up alongside of their newest neighbors, and to build positive relationships. And so congregations like Grace and others have helped provide food and diapers and hygiene items. They've helped provide emergency help with rent and bills, especially now during COVID. They have made calls to their local congressmen. They visited with us to go and visit our immigrant neighbors in detention 8 hours south in the huge, massive detention center, which is where the vast majority of detained immigrants from North Carolina end up, in this tiny little this town called Lumpkin, Georgia, dilapidated town, and so congregations have been absolutely crucial. A lot of our work is built on the support we receive from diverse people of faith, and so that's kind of the story of who we are.
Awesome, thank you. Is there you're a preacher, so you know that oftentimes one good story kind of tells it all. Is there maybe a story of a person or family that Faith Action has helped that sort of captures why you do what you do, how you do what you do? Is there a story that comes to mind?
There's too many of them. One that comes to mind, we provide direct help with things like food, housing, healthcare, legal services, emergency help for those facing domestic violence or detention and deportation, referrals for furniture, clothing, etc. But we've become, across the state and now nation, especially well known for our innovative what's called FaithAction ID card program. There are a lot of newcomers, as well as people who may be homeless, those recently returning from jail, who don't have access to government-issued forms of ID or North Carolina driver's licenses. So when they're pulled over by law enforcement, or when they try to check in for a health appointment or register their children for school, they may not have anything that can be accepted. So 7 years ago, we created an ID that basically says FaithAction ID. And those sectors we talked about, law enforcement, health centers, schools, they didn't have to accept the ID, but because we had done a lot of training with them, we'd built a lot of trust with them, they knew that our process for people to receive the ID had integrity. We were avoiding fraud. We believed we could have a good deal of trust that this person was who they say they are in their ID, that they agreed to accept it. They didn't have to, but they chose to accept it. And now we have over 24 law enforcement agencies, as well as dozens of health centers, schools, businesses across the state and nation that now accept this ID in lieu of a government-issued ID. A real innovative way to bring people with limited or no status from all over the world who are, again, didn't want to have to cross a border or overstay a visa, but their life was on the line. They had no other choice, and there is no line for them to get into to get legal status. They were just trying to keep their family alive. So to bring them together with those existing sectors at a time of great tension around this issue, we're kind of trying to build relationship at the local level and find solutions at the local level. If the federal government can't do it, then we'll find solutions, and God's people will find a way at the local level. And so a lot of congregations have chosen to host these ID drives where people will come, show their documents, go through an orientation that describes what the ID is and is not. There's usually a health fair there. Schools are usually there to answer questions, etc. And not too long ago, Temple Emmanuel, a Jewish Reform temple, hosted an ID drive. And I believe they had some people from the congregation who had survived the Holocaust or had family members killed in the Holocaust, who decided not only to volunteer, but to get in line and show their documents right alongside, Middle Eastern and African Muslims, evangelical and Catholic Latinos, mostly undocumented folks, as well as some people who may have been homeless or returning from prison that needed the ID. And to see them get in line, and they didn't need the ID, but to show their documents, they knew on a deep personal level what that meant. And the fact that they, as an act of solidarity, not only hosted those people in their space, but got the ID right alongside of them was really remarkably beautiful. And that really captures when we say turning strangers into neighbors and united people of diverse faiths and uniting U.S. citizens with newcomers together. And again, that program is now, was launched in Greensboro. Cone Health, the police department, Guilford County Schools were the first to accept it, but it's now in Charlottesville, Virginia, Hood River, Oregon, Ames, Iowa, West Palm Beach, Florida, and Cincinnati, Ohio. And it all started here because, our newcomer community and existing citizens were willing to dance together, if you will, in life, to really see each other as a part of God's shared creation. And that ID, it's like, if you accept my ID, you accept me as a human being. And that's extremely significant these days. It's not the end goal. Immigration reform is, a driver's license would be better, but it's a beautiful first step. So that's one recent story that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful. Thanks for sharing that. And I, I I don't know how everything has changed with your work in the midst of all this, but we're a downtown church with good parking, and at some point, if you need a place for an ID drive, we'd love to host one when you need one. Just
We
let
would
us
love
know. That would be great.
that
Uh,
downstairs would be terrific for that.
Great. Yeah, we have a good location for things like that. We're blessed that way. I think before I turn it over to some questions from others, maybe the last question and what's on a lot of our minds is how has your work changed with the pandemic and COVID and everything, and how's life changed for those that you serve? What does all that look like now?
Thanks for asking. So these days, in the last couple of years, we've been serving about 3,000 newcomer families a year, from about 60 diverse nations. Again, the majority have limited or no status, live near or below the poverty line, so they really have very limited access. So consequently, they need a lot of help with a lot of services. Again, food, housing, healthcare, legal services, ID cards, etc. And then we do about 70 trainings a year to schools, health centers, businesses, houses of worship. And then we do these stranger to neighbor events, our multicultural Thanksgiving, our downtown unity walk. Essentially, what happened 3 months ago was that everything boiled down to basically all the work that we do, all the training, all the bridge building events, all the services boiled down to three things. And they're basically the three things all human beings need to survive. It's food, it's healthcare, it's a roof over your head. And so we not only saw an even greater increase in the amount of people seeking our help, we also saw the cases become a whole lot more urgent. And so we saw not only a massive increase in the amount of food, diapers, and hygiene items we needed to put out, we had a lot of people who had emergency health issues, who already weren't able to get access to health insurance, some of whom were affected by COVID, some who were not, but still needed to be seen by a doctor. We really needed to handle those very sensitive cases and give people the help that they needed. But I would say probably the largest one was people being out of work, having no savings. They don't receive any kind of stimulus checks or anything else like that. And they were many of our clients and friends were in deep need of emergency help with rent and bills. And you could say, well, wasn't there a moratorium on evictions? Yeah, but rent is still due. And so are the bills. And so we're trying to avert another massive homelessness crisis if we don't go ahead and take care of rent. And so we quietly, for the last several years, have been providing around $2,500 a month for people in emergency need of rent. We're now up to doing about 15 and are likely going to do around $20,000 a month just this month. And so we've had close to 10 times the amount of financial assistance that we've needed to provide. And the good news in all of this is that given the devastation that's taking place by this pandemic, that God knows we all hope will leave us sooner than later. The good news is that the spirit of care, of solidarity from our volunteers, from our congregations, is kind of keeping pace with the devastation of the virus, and that includes grace. And some of the congregants and support that you all have given have helped people ensure that they're not going to become homeless, that the air conditioning is going to stay on this summer, and have let people know, that they're not alone. And to be able to tell some of our clients by phone, a lot of my colleagues will tell me, I wish you could hear their voices when we say we were able to cover that $1,000, rent bills. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And they know that they don't know the people who gave that money, but the fact that somebody who may be a stranger has now become a deep neighbor to them, that even though they don't know them face to face, that they stepped up to care for them in that way. That's, for me, the Holy Spirit's involved in that. That's beautiful. That's part of what we mean by love our neighbor as ourselves. But we have to go deeper. We have to look at, why can't these people get status? Why are we putting up with inhumane detention centers and families being ripped apart? why don't we can create together a better pathway forward. And so, we're kind of also wanting to take that next step. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. What, I'll turn it over to questions after this, but what are the main, you mentioned a couple, but what are main ways that either organizations like our church or individuals can partner with Faith Action and have an impact in your work?
Yeah. Well, as a congregation or individuals, we have a couple of listservs. So if you were to say, I as an individual, or we as a family, or we as a congregation want to be on your food listserv, all you would need to do is just share your email with me. And anytime we need a certain type of food or hygiene item or diaper size or something like that, we would just let you know. And we'd give you a couple times you could drop them off at the house. And then I'd come a little bit later to take them into the house. That's one very simple one. Number two, you could also join a financial listserv where you'll start to get generally a couple of times a week, a brief story of one of our clients using first names only, what their circumstances, so you understand that we have spent significant time with the client, why they might need help with rent or bills. Oftentimes they're doing their best to put in, even if it's $50 of the $700 themselves. So you're partnering together on this. It's not charity, but solidarity. And basically we send that out, and then whoever gets back to us the quickest and says, I can help with $200, or I can help with all 650, or whatever it might be. We then just email them back, say, thank you so much for loving your neighbors yourself. And here's the address where you need to send the check to the rentor, or to the landlord, to Duke Energy, or whatever it might be. So the payment goes directly there. And that's a really cool, direct way, kind of it's a wonderful lifestyle of helping our newest neighbors. So those are a couple of really direct, easy ways that people could do that. And of course, we always accept donations. Our website's faithaction.org to help us continue this. And hopefully when things, when this virus subsides, you all could host an ID drive and not only have provide the space, but get in line and get an ID right alongside your newest neighbors.
That's awesome. That's really
and,
cool.
And I should also add, we do bi-monthly visits to the detention centers. It's a 16-hour round trip, but if you want your life changed, come with us to go see your neighbors in detention, to visit them for a half hour. I know it sounds like 16 hours, an entire weekend just for a half hour, but I can't, that can be life-saving for the people inside to know that somebody that they don't know traveled 16 hours, to let them know that they care and they're going to do all they can to support them and their family.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. And our folks may not know, we're on the listserv, the financial listserv, and people are quick on the draw on that thing, because I've not had a chance yet. We for us, there's a kind of a team of folks that would say, yes, we can do this, and cut the check. And before I can ever say, do all that, it gets done. But we're going to work harder on that. But we are on that listserv, and we have some mission funds I'd like to make use of to at least.
And if you ever, want to share that with some trusted, congregants, feel free, just so they're aware of the kind of stories. And if you just wanted to email myself or my colleague Jose and just say, hey, will you, before you send the next one out to the entire listserv, we'd love to maybe cover the next one. If it seems like a good fit, would you mind just sending that directly to us? We could work that out.
Okay. Yeah, that would be cool, because the committees are great, and committees also sometimes make things slow, and so that's helpful to know. I want to open it up. We've got others that are on with us. I want to open it up to some other folks from Grace that might have questions and other things for you, Dave. So if anyone has a question, unmute yourself and raise a digital or physical hand, and I think it looks like Mary's got a question.
So we know several people who are in sort of nonprofit service kind of industries, and a lot of them have a work themselves out of a job kind of a goal. For people who are doing clean water, they work themselves out of a job by making sure everybody has clean water. Is there a point at which you work yourself out of a job? Is there an end goal, or do you think this is kind of a thing that is, even in the hypothetical sense, always ongoing?
Two thoughts on that, and it's a good question. Right now, there are more people who have been forced to flee their homeland than in any other time in human history. And with global warming and competition and conflict over water, food, it's only going to increase. So sadly, there are going to be people without status and consequently without access to food, healthcare, ID cards, and that's only going to sadly increase. And so I think work like Faith Action is going to be needed for a long time to come. The second way I answer that question is I'm not an immigrant, and it would be important, I think, at some point for someone who is an immigrant to take the leadership role at Faith Action. Now, I think I'm still needed because, again, my role is a little bit less to be the person trying to, solve the problems of the people knocking on our door every day. I have an outstanding staff, most of whom are immigrants that do that. My role is a little bit to educate the larger community who grew up in similar cities like I did, to help meet them where they're at and take them on a heart and mind journey so they start to understand this issue better. But I do think that there's ways in which eventually I don't think I'll work myself out of a job, but I think it'll be time for somebody else, perhaps from that community, especially to replace me.
Thank you for that, Mary. Any other questions? Who, Dave? Who would be you mentioned that the hope would be for significant immigration reform that's not happened for 25 years. So, that sounds to me like what you're describing is something that's bipartisan. It's not that when these people are in power, we don't get reform. It sounds like it's been kind of uniform across whoever's in power. But who's trying to make that happen, or what are the voices we could amplify if we want to get that? Obviously, right now there's a whole lot of things going on in the world, but who is it that's still trying to get that ball across the goal line?
Sadly, and people don't really remember this, but it was, I think, a few months short of 9/11. There was the McCain-Kennedy bill, both of whom are now who have passed on, Edward Kennedy and John McCain, who had come up with a pathway for, I think, a significant portion of people with limited or no status in this country. And it wasn't a quick pathway. It was not amnesty or anything close to it. I think it was a 5 to 10 year wait. You had to stay on the straight and narrow, pay back taxes, although the vast majority of undocumented people are already paying taxes through something called an ITIN number if they don't have a social security number. At any rate, people don't realize that when 9/11 happened, obviously that basically united Homeland Security with immigration. We really tightened our laws, and attempts at immigration reform or anything close to that bill have really not gotten much traction since that time. The closest thing to it has probably been DACA under the Obama administration for the young people who came here as children with parents who had no status. Although I should also note that Obama, as a president, deported more people than the current administration. A lot of people don't realize that either. So it was certainly, you can see I'm not overly partisan one way or the other, and detention blossomed under both Republican and Democrat presidents. Although I would say the current administration has been by far the toughest. There's almost bad news every single day on immigration under this current president. And we're about to get a decision on DACA probably next week. And if the Supreme Court decides to say, we uphold Trump's decision to end that program, then you're going to have, I think, around 700, close to 1 million children who came here at a very young age, including some of our clients who came here when they were 6 months old, who could end up in a detention center or be deported, who graduated from kindergarten here, middle school, high school. They've gone to college here. They are now working. They have driver's licenses because of DACA, even though they had to pay out-of-state tuition because they can't get in-state tuition because they aren't They don't have a legal pathway forward, even though they've been here since they've been 6 months old. And I say 6 months because we have a client that's in that very dynamic. And so if that happens, and look out for it this week, on top of everything else that's going, it is going to be a major blow. So we're really hoping that DACA is kept in place, and better yet, immigration reform comes that not only helps those young people, but their parents as well, and provides them a pathway, even if it's 5 to 10 years. Because we found in our work, you give folks, most immigrants, no culture's full of just angels, but you give most newcomers a pinky's worth of welcome, and they will pay it back in tremendous hard work, loyalty, innovation, and artistry, and go on to become some of the best teachers, scientists, soldiers, etc. And it's not, we are missing out on a wonderful opportunity as a nation to not provide this. And so there are people currently in Congress and the Senate who care about this issue, who'd love to see it happen. But it's not going to happen under the current administration. I feel pretty confident about that. And so I do think it would take a regime change or new president for that to happen. And it's, I would say, and I don't mean to sound partisan here, but it has typically been Democrats that have been far more willing to move towards immigration reform in the last, since 9/11 especially. That's what made the McCain-Kennedy bill so promising, as it truly was bipartisan. And so it's going to be a lot harder unless you have a complete control of Congress, Senate, and the presidency. But again, I don't mean to be partisan in that regard. I think there have been Republicans in the past who have demonstrated a tremendous amount of support. Lindsey Graham at one point was actually really an advocate for this. So it just kind of depends on the culture of the times, unfortunately.
Thanks. Any other questions for Dave before we say goodnight? And everyone's got stuff to do. We won't stay longer than we need to, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask their questions. Skeens, go for it.
So David, have you seen any kind of trend in the desire for education on this, for this group, or has there been less of a desire? I'm wondering how the local, I guess, city at large has kind of trended, or has it kind of held the same?
I think you mean education amongst people who are existing citizens wanting to know about this issue. Yeah,
exactly. Looking to educate themselves on immigration and just the immigrant population.
When I first started a decade ago, we were averaging maybe 20, 25 presentations or educational trainings a year. And it was mostly, again, with law enforcement, health centers, schools, city departments, congregations. We're now up to about 75 a year, and we're not having to do any proactive outreach at all on any of those. So there has been an increase in wanting to know, at the very least, how to kind of grow in their understanding, trust, and cooperation with this newcomer population, because maybe some people can hide in a bubble and not have to interact, but most people that work in healthcare, law enforcement, city departments, schools, by nature of their job, they can't be in a bubble. They have to interact. And so I think they recognize that Faith Action does a good job of helping them understand this issue better, so they can grow in their empathy and understanding of their newest neighbors. But also how they can practically build trust and cooperation with somebody of a different culture, faith, nationality, or even language. And those are a lot of skills that I picked up in the detention center, as I talked about earlier. So it's been actually pretty darn good. And it's because of those educational trainings that a lot of those sectors were willing then to accept our ID. And so it was kind of the flip side of the same coin. And so it's been really good. I think what's happened is it's not only been Greensboro, but increasingly we're seeing a lot of cities, including rural areas, Roanoke Rapids, Morganton's, Asheboroughs, reach out and say, we'd love some help too. Department of Health and Human Services in those communities, and Department of Public Health. So, and that's where I really love to go to do these trainings, because Greensboro's dealt with diversity now for a while. A lot of those cities are brand new to it. And there's kind of a reputation sometimes, if you're in smaller towns, North Carolina, it's going to be a certain way. but there's some really beautiful stories coming out of those communities where new immigrants and existing citizens have really gotten along in some remarkable ways. And I kind of wish the New York Times or Washington Post or NPR would actually come and report on that just as much as they would report on, conflict and protests in the streets, because there's some remarkable stories. So yeah, that's actually been it's a good question. And I felt really hopeful about that. Technology is not now my first language. And so we haven't adapted super quick to how to do our trainings online with those communities. And because this may be with us a little bit longer than we want it to be, I think that's our next step as an organization, to figure out how to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question, Matt. Thank you. I'll draw us close to a close here. For those who might be watching this later on when it's recorded, who are maybe new to our congregation or aren't familiar, part of our mission statement at Grace is to embrace all people with God's love, and that certainly includes our immigrant and refugee neighbors, our newcomer neighbors. And we're grateful for partnerships with organizations like FaithAction. We also have an ongoing partnership with Learning Together, which is one of the associated programs with Guilford Child Development, where we have mostly moms and children doing ESL classes in our building 4 days a week when school's in session. We're grateful for that. We've had some engagement with Church World Service before. This is something that's part of the DNA of our congregation, but it's obviously an ongoing learning and an ongoing being aware of what's happening. And so, Dave, really appreciate you being with us this evening. I know a lot of us are zoomed out right now, and one more Zoom call is not what anyone needs, but we appreciate you taking the time to be with us, sharing some ways that we can be engaged with your work. I'll give you the last word, and we do thank you for your time this evening.
Well, thank you, Drew. And for those who are on the call, I mean, you just spent 45 minutes of your evening listening to me. So I hope I get a chance to worship with you all, sit down and listen to you all share at some point. It means a lot to me that you took the time. And I hope that regardless of how long this lasts, you find a way that you can kind of put your faith into action through the work that we do at FaithAction. I'm grateful for your past partnership and appreciate everything you're doing. I really do.
All right. With that, we will sign off. Thanks so much, and we'll look forward to having you again soon, Dave. And hopefully, when things are a little bit calmer with the pandemic, some ways that we can partner together. And we got some digital high fives coming up as well. That's fun. So thanks so much. God bless. We'll talk to you soon, and please thank your family for sharing your evening with us.
It's a pleasure. It's nice to see human beings that are cool and spend a little time with y'all. So I hope I get a chance to meet you in person. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks.